Hey there, welcome back to Story Slices, where we slice through the best Reddit tales just for you. Let's dive right into the first story. The first one is the Tittle story, and it starts like this. I never thought I'd find myself in a legal battle with my own homeowners association, but life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. My name's Mike, and for the past 15 years, I've been living in what I consider paradise, a modest beachfront bungalow on the coast of Florida. The sound of waves crashing against the shore has been my alarm clock, and the salty sea breeze my air freshener. It's not a fancy place by any means, but it's home, and I wouldn't trade it for all the McMansions in the world. I inherited this little slice of heaven from my grandfather, who built it with his own two hands back in the 1950s. He was a simple man who loved fishing and wanted a quiet place to retire. Over the years, as development crept up around us, our little stretch of beach remained relatively untouched. Sure, there were fancier houses popping up nearby, but our small community of about 20 homes kept its charm. When I first moved in after my grandfather passed, I was wary of joining the homeowners association. I'd heard horror stories about power-hungry board members and ridiculous rules, but my neighbors assured me it was just a formality, a way to maintain our private beach access and keep the community looking nice. For years, that's exactly what it was. We'd have the occasional disagreement about paint colors or fence heights, but nothing major. That all changed when Harold Pinkerton got elected as homeowner association president. Harold moved into the neighborhood about 5 years ago, buying one of the biggest houses on our stretch of beach. From day one, it was clear he had big plans for our little community. He started talking about modernization and increasing property values. Most of us just rolled our eyes and ignored him. But Harold was persistent. He managed to get a few of his cronies elected to the board, and suddenly, the homeowner association meetings became a lot more contentious. They started proposing all sorts of new rules and regulations, everything from mandating specific types of landscaping to dictating what kind of cars could be parked in driveways. Most of these proposals got shot down, but Harold didn't give up. I should have seen the warning signs. Looking back, it's clear Harold had his sights set on my property from the beginning. He'd often make comments about how underutilized my lot was, or how much potential it had for development. I always brushed him off, thinking he was just being nosy. Then, about 6 months ago, things took a turn I never could have imagined. I received a certified letter from the homeowner association, claiming that my property was actually owned by the association and that I was living there illegally. The letter went on to say that I had 30 days to vacate the premises or face legal action. To say I was shocked would be an understatement. I immediately called my neighbor, Tom, who'd lived in the community even longer than I had. "Tom, you're not going to believe this," I said, my voice shaking with anger and disbelief. "The homeowner association is claiming they own my house. They're trying to evict me." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "What? That's insane, Mike. How could they possibly think they own your property?" I explained about the letter, reading parts of it to him over the phone. Tom's reaction mirrored my own, a mix of confusion and outrage. "This has Harold written all over it," Tom growled. "He's been talking about big plans for the beachfront at the last few meetings. I thought he was just blowing hot air, but this is something else." We agreed to meet up later that day to go over the letter in detail and figure out our next steps. In the meantime, I called every neighbor I could think of, trying to gather information and support. The responses ranged from sympathetic disbelief to awkward silence. It quickly became clear that while most of my neighbors thought the homeowner association's claim was ridiculous, they were hesitant to get involved. That evening, as Tom and I sat on my back porch, watching the sunset over the ocean, we tried to make sense of the situation. "I just don't understand how they can claim to own my property," I said, running my hands through my hair in frustration. "I have the deed. I pay the property taxes. Hell, my grandfather built this place." Tom nodded, his brow furrowed in thought. "There's got to be some angle they're playing here. Maybe they found some old document or loophole they think they can exploit." As we talked, we pieced together what we knew. Apparently, at the last homeowner association meeting, which I'd missed due to a work trip, Harold had presented some newly discovered documents that supposedly showed that all the beachfront properties were actually built on land owned by the original developer, who had then transferred ownership to the homeowner association decades ago. "But that's ridiculous," I argued. "If that were true, why hasn't it come up before now? And why are they only targeting my property?" Tom shook his head. "I don't know, Mike, but I've got a bad feeling about this. Harold's been talking to some big-shot real estate developer. I think he's trying to sell off the beachfront lots for some kind of resort complex." The thought made my blood run cold. Not only was I facing the possibility of losing my home, but the entire character of our little community was at stake. I knew I had to fight this, not just for myself, but for all of us who called this beach home. The next few weeks were a blur of activity. I hired a lawyer, dug through decades of paperwork, and tried to rally support from my neighbors. Many were sympathetic but scared to go against the homeowner association. A few, like Tom, stood firmly by my side. My lawyer, a sharp-tongued woman named Sarah Goldstein, was skeptical of the homeowner association's claims from the start. "This reeks of fraud," she said during our first meeting. "Even if they did find some old document, it wouldn't supersede decades of established ownership and property taxes. We're going to fight this, Mr. Thompson, and we're going to win." Her confidence was reassuring, but I couldn't help feeling overwhelmed. This was my home, my legacy. The thought of losing it was almost too much to bear. As the 30-day deadline approached, things heated up. Harold and his cronies on the Homeowner Association board started a smear campaign against me. They held emergency meetings where they painted me as a squatter who had been taking advantage of the community for years. They even went so far as to suggest that my grandfather had falsified documents to claim ownership of the land. It was during one of these meetings that I finally lost my cool. I stormed into the community center, interrupting Harold mid-speech. "How dare you!" I shouted, my face red with anger. "My grandfather was twice the man you'll ever be, Harold. He built this community while you're trying to destroy it." The room fell silent. Harold's face turned an interesting shade of purple as he sputtered, trying to regain control of the situation. "Mr. Thompson," he said, his voice dripping with fake concern, "I understand this is difficult for you, but the facts are the facts. The Homeowner Association owns this land, and we have big plans for it, plans that will benefit everyone in the community." I laughed bitterly. "Benefit everyone? Or just line your pockets, Harold? We all know about your meetings with that developer. You're trying to sell us out." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. It was clear that not everyone had been aware of Harold's behind-the-scenes dealings. That's preposterous," Harold stammered. "I'm just trying to do what's best for our community. Mr. Thompson is spreading lies because he doesn't want to admit he's been living on our land illegally for years." I was about to respond when I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was Tom, along with a few other neighbors who had stood by me through this ordeal. "I think we've all heard enough, Harold," Tom said calmly. "This meeting is over. We'll see you in court." With that, we walked out, leaving Harold sputtering behind us. As we left the community center, I felt a mix of emotions, anger, fear, but also a glimmer of hope. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like I wasn't alone in this fight. The next few months were a whirlwind of legal proceedings. Sarah, my lawyer, filed a countersuit against the Homeowner Association, alleging fraud and attempting to extort property under false pretenses. We gathered evidence, took depositions, and prepared for what promised to be a lengthy court battle. Throughout it all, the stress was nearly unbearable. There were nights when I'd sit on my back porch, listening to the waves and wondering if it would be the last time I'd be able to enjoy this view from my home. But I refused to give up. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about standing up to bullies who thought they could steamroll over people's lives for their own gain. As the court date approached, Harold and the Homeowner Association board became increasingly desperate. They started offering settlements, first offering to let me stay as a renter, then proposing to buy the property at well below market value. I refused each offer, growing more determined with each attempt to push me out. Finally, the day of the trial arrived. As I put on my best suit, which admittedly had seen better days, I tried to calm my nerves. Sarah had assured me we had a strong case, but anything could happen in a courtroom. The courthouse was packed. It seemed like the entire community had turned out to watch the proceedings. As I walked in, I was heartened to see many of my neighbors offering supportive smiles and nods. Even those who had been hesitant to get involved seemed to be rooting for me. The trial itself was a roller coaster. Sarah masterfully presented our case, meticulously laying out the history of my property ownership, the taxes I'd paid, and the improvements I'd made over the years. She then turned to the Homeowner Association's claims, systematically dismantling them with a combination of legal expertise and good old-fashioned common sense. "Your Honor," she said at one point, "the documents the Homeowner Association is basing their claim on are, at best, highly suspicious. They conveniently appeared just as lucrative development opportunities arose, and they contradict decades of established property records. This is nothing more than a thinly veiled attempt at a land grab." The Homeowner Association's lawyer, a slick-looking guy in an expensive suit, tried to argue that the recently discovered documents superseded all other claims. But as the trial wore on, it became clear that their case was built on shaky ground. The turning point came when Sarah called Harold to the stand. Under her relentless questioning, he began to squirm. She pressed him on his meetings with developers, the timing of the discovery of the documents, and the Homeowner Association's sudden interest in my property. "Mr. Pinkerton," Sarah said, her voice sharp, "isn't it true that you stand to personally profit from the sale of this beachfront property to developers?" Harold's face turned red. That's not. I'm just trying to do what's best for the community." "And what's best for the community is forcing out long-time residents and destroying the very character that makes this place special," Sarah countered. As Harold fumbled for an answer, I could see the judge's expression change. It was subtle, but there was a glimmer of something in his eyes, disgust, perhaps, or simply the recognition of the truth. The trial lasted for 3 days, though it felt like an eternity. As the judge retired to consider his verdict, I felt a strange sense of calm. Win or lose, I knew I'd fought as hard as I could. I'd stood up for what was right, not just for myself, but for my community. When we returned to the courtroom for the verdict, you could have heard a pin drop. The judge, a stern-looking man with salt and pepper hair, cleared his throat. After careful consideration of the evidence presented, he began, "This court finds in favor of the plaintiff, Mr. Thompson." The rest of his words were drowned out by the cheers and applause from my supporters in the gallery. I sat there, stunned, as Sarah hugged me tightly. "We did it, Mike," she whispered. "We won." As the judge continued, it became clear just how comprehensive our victory was. Not only was I to retain full ownership of my property, but the homeowner association was ordered to pay substantial damages for their fraudulent claims and the distress they'd caused. Furthermore, the judge recommended a full investigation into the homeowner association's practices, particularly Harold's dealings with developers. As we left the courthouse, I was mobbed by well-wishers and reporters. Through the chaos, I caught sight of Harold slinking away, his face a mask of defeat and anger. Part of me felt sorry for him, but a larger part was simply relieved that his scheme had been stopped. In the weeks that followed, our community underwent significant changes. Harold resigned from the Homeowner Association Board in disgrace, and several of his supporters followed suit. A new board was elected, with a focus on preserving the character of our neighborhood rather than chasing development dollars. As for me, I returned to my little beachfront bungalow with a newfound appreciation for it. The first night back, I sat on my porch watching the sunset, just as I had countless times before. But now, each crash of the waves seemed to whisper, "You're home, you're safe." The whole ordeal had been a stark reminder of how quickly the things we take for granted can be threatened. But it also showed me the power of standing up for what's right, and the strength of a community coming together. In the end, my grandfather's legacy was preserved, not just in the form of the house he built, but in the spirit of the community he helped create. As I sat there, watching the stars come out over the ocean, I made a silent promise to him and to myself, to always protect this little slice of paradise, not just for me, but for all those who call this beach home. The legal battle may have been won, but I knew the real work was just beginning. Our community had been shaken, and it would take time to rebuild trust and heal the divisions that had formed. But as I looked out at the peaceful ocean, I felt ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. After all, I was home, and home was worth fighting for. In the months that followed our court victory, life in our beachfront community slowly returned to normal, but with some noticeable changes. The atmosphere was lighter, as if a dark cloud had been lifted. Neighbors who had been hesitant to speak out during the conflict now approached me with apologies and words of support. One sunny Saturday morning, as I was tinkering with my old boat in the driveway, my neighbor Lisa came over with a basket of homemade muffins. "Mike," she said, a bit sheepishly, "I just wanted to say I'm sorry for not speaking up sooner. We were all scared of what Harold might do, but that's no excuse. What you did for our community? Well, we can't thank you enough." I accepted the muffins with a smile. "Thanks, Lisa. I understand why people were hesitant. I'm just glad it's all over now." As we chatted, I realized how much I had missed these simple interactions with my neighbors. The legal battle had created an atmosphere of suspicion and division, but now, it felt like we were truly becoming a community again. The new Homeowner Association Board, led by Tom, was a breath of fresh air. Instead of focusing on restrictive rules and grandiose development plans, they turned their attention to what really mattered to the residents. They organized beach cleanup days, started a community garden, and even set up a program to help elderly neighbors with home maintenance. One of their first acts was to pass a resolution affirming the rights of all property owners and pledging transparency in all homeowner association dealings. It wasn't legally necessary, but it went a long way toward rebuilding trust. As for Harold, he became something of a pariah in the community. I heard through the grapevine that he was trying to sell his house, but potential buyers were put off by the story of his failed takeover attempt. Part of me felt a twinge of satisfaction at his predicament, but mostly, I just felt relieved that his influence over our community was gone. About 6 months after the trial, I received an unexpected visit from Sarah, my lawyer. She arrived at my door with a thick folder under her arm and a determined look on her face. "Mike," she said as soon as I opened the door, "we need to talk. Remember how the judge recommended an investigation into the homeowner association's practices? Well, I've been doing some digging, and what I've found, it's bigger than we thought." I invited her in, and we sat at my kitchen table. As Sarah spread out documents and explained her findings, I felt a mix of shock and anger. It turned out that Harold's scheme went far beyond just my property. He had been working with developers to gradually buy up properties all along our stretch of beach, using a variety of underhanded tactics. He was playing the long game, Sarah explained. The plan was to slowly accumulate properties, then use the homeowner association's authority to force out the holdouts like you. Once they had control of the entire beachfront, they were going to sell it off for a massive resort development. I shook my head in disbelief. But how did he think he'd get away with it? Surely someone would have noticed. Sarah sighed. That's the clever part. He was doing it so gradually, and through various shell companies, that it wasn't obvious unless you knew what to look for. Your case was the linchpin. If he could force you out, it would have set a precedent for the others. As we talked, a plan began to form. With Sarah's evidence, we could not only ensure that Harold and his co-conspirators faced justice, but we could also help those who had been manipulated into selling their properties. Over the next few weeks, Sarah and I worked tirelessly, reaching out to former residents and piecing together the full extent of Harold's scheme. We brought our findings to the authorities, and soon, a full-scale investigation was underway. The fallout was significant. Harold and several of his business associates were arrested on charges of fraud and racketeering. The development company that had been working with them distanced itself from the project, issuing a public apology and offering to sell back the properties they had acquired to the original owners at the purchase price. As news of the investigation spread, our little community once again found itself in the spotlight. This time, however, the story was one of triumph over corruption, of a close-knit neighborhood banding together to preserve their way of life. One evening, as the investigation was in full swing, I received a call from an unknown number. When I answered, I was surprised to hear Harold's voice on the other end. "Mike," he said, his voice lacking its usual arrogance. I wanted to talk to you." I was tempted to hang up, but curiosity got the better of me. "What could you possibly have to say, Harold?" There was a long pause before he spoke again. "I wanted to apologize. I know it doesn't change anything, but I need you to know that I never meant for things to go this far." I couldn't help but laugh. "You tried to steal my home, Harold. You were going to destroy our entire community for your own profit. How did you not mean for things to go this far?" I got caught up in it all," he stammered. "The money, the power. I convinced myself I was doing the right thing, that I was bringing progress, but I was wrong. I see that now." As I listened to Harold's apology, I felt a mix of emotions. Part of me was still angry, still wanted to lash out at him for all the stress and pain he had caused, but another part recognized the defeat in his voice, the genuine remorse. "Harold," I said finally, "I appreciate your apology. I really do. But you're right, it doesn't change what happened. You're going to have to face the consequences of your actions. The best thing you can do now is cooperate with the investigation and try to make things right." After I hung up, I sat on my porch, watching the waves and reflecting on everything that had happened. The past year had been a roller coaster of emotions, fear, anger, determination, and finally, vindication. But as I looked out at the peaceful beach, I realized that the most important thing hadn't changed. This was still my home, still the place my grandfather had loved and built with his own hands. In the following months, our community began the process of healing and rebuilding. Many of the former residents who had been pressured into selling their homes were able to buy them back. We organized a big welcome-back barbecue on the beach, celebrating not just their return, but the spirit of our community that had endured through it all. As I watched my neighbors laughing and sharing stories around the bonfire, I felt a deep sense of gratitude. This battle had shown me the true value of community, of standing up for what's right even when it seems impossible. It had also reminded me of the legacy my grandfather had left, not just a house, but a place where people could come together and build something special. The legal proceedings against Harold and his associates dragged on for months, but eventually, justice was served. They were found guilty on multiple charges, facing hefty fines and, in Harold's case, jail time. The court also mandated that any profits from their scheme be used to establish a fund for maintaining and improving our community's shared spaces. As life settled back into a rhythm, I found myself more involved in community affairs than ever before. I joined the Homeowner Association Board, working alongside Tom and others to ensure that our neighborhood remained the welcoming, close-knit place it had always been. We implemented new bylaws to prevent any future attempts at large-scale development without overwhelming community support. One project I was particularly proud of was the creation of a community history center. We converted an old boathouse into a small museum, showcasing the stories of our neighborhood's founding families, including my grandfather. It became a place where newcomers could learn about our community's roots, and longtime residents could reminisce about the old days. On the one-year anniversary of our court victory, we held a community celebration. As I stood on the beach, surrounded by my neighbors and friends, I couldn't help but feel a sense of awe at how far we'd come. Tom raised a toast. "To Mike," he said, his voice carrying over the sound of the waves, "who reminded us all what it means to fight for your home, and to all of us, for proving that when we stand together, there's nothing we can't overcome." As cheers erupted around me, I felt a lump in my throat. I looked out at the ocean, the same view my grandfather had fallen in love with all those years ago, and I knew that no matter what challenges the future might bring, our little slice of paradise was safe. The sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. As I watched my neighbors enjoying the beach, children playing in the sand, and old friends catching up, I realized that we had gained something precious through this ordeal. We had rediscovered the true meaning of community, not just a group of people living in the same area, but a family bound together by shared experiences and a common love for our home. In the end, the Homeowner Association's attempt to seize my property had failed, but it had given us something far more valuable. It had strengthened our bonds, reminded us of what was truly important, and ensured that our little beachfront community would remain a haven for generations to come. As I walked along the water's edge, feeling the warm sand between my toes, I silently thanked my grandfather for the legacy he had left us. And I made a promise, to him, to myself, and to my community, that I would always be ready to fight for this place we all called home. The waves crashed gently on the shore, a constant reminder of the enduring nature of our little paradise. And as the stars began to twinkle in the darkening sky, I knew that whatever the future might hold, we would face it together, stronger and more united than ever before. Are you hungry for more slices of stories? Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell to never miss out on any videos. See you tomorrow at Story Slices.